Stop the procedure. The old man's voice came through the operating room intercom with enough force to cut through the hum of pumps, ventilation, and polished machines. Dr. Ethan Cole did not look away from the three-dimensional image of General Robert Hale's heart. A clean digital map rotated above the catheter controls. Near the lower edge of the old scar, a gray shadow appeared, then vanished. "Doctor," Walter Mercer said from behind the observation glass, "that mark is not an imaging error." Ethan glanced toward him. Walter was 79, white-haired, thin beneath a faded field jacket. He wore no hospital badge, no medical credential, no visible rank. Only pale blue eyes fixed on a place the system had repeatedly cleaned from the image. Captain Emily Brooks stood beside him holding a yellowed field X-ray against the light. On that older film, the shadow was not faint. It was a narrow sliver of metal angled behind the scar. Ethan looked back at the monitor. The current scan places the object outside the treatment field. Walter rested one weathered hand against the glass. "You are looking at where the signal appears," his voice lowered, "not where the wound began." A warning tone sounded. General Hale's rhythm changed. Not dramatically, only enough for Walter's expression to harden. "I have heard that pattern before," he said. Ethan's hand stopped above the controls. 40 minutes earlier, Walter Mercer had entered Eisenhower Army Medical Center through the east lobby, with rain darkening the shoulders of his field jacket. A sealed manila envelope rested beneath one arm. The morning crowd moved around him in brisk currents of uniforms, rolling carts, polished shoes, and clipped voices. Walter moved slowly, but not uncertainly. At the security desk, Sergeant Daniel Price searched the visitor roster twice. "No, Walter Mercer is cleared to see General Hale." Walter placed the envelope on the counter. Robert Hale's name had been written across the front in a firm hand. "He asked me to come before the procedure. The general has already been transferred to the cardiac wing." "Then take this to him." Price glanced at the seal. "Only immediate family and medical personnel have access." Walter looked toward the elevators. What is in that envelope is part of his medical history. Before Price could answer, Dr. Ethan Cole crossed the lobby with Captain Emily Brooks. Ethan was 34, chief of minimally invasive cardiac surgery, the youngest Army physician ever selected to lead a procedure of this complexity at the center. He carried his accomplishments quietly, but not lightly. Price explained the situation. Ethan examined Walter with quick professional impatience. "General Hale needs rest. Whatever is in the envelope can wait until recovery." Walter studied the surgeon's face. "You are using electrical mapping near the lower cardiac scar." Emily looked up from her tablet. Ethan's expression changed only slightly. "How do you know the procedure?" "Robert told me. His medical care is confidential. His history is incomplete." The lobby noise seemed to recede. Ethan folded his arms. "I have reviewed every scan, test, and surgical note connected to this case." Walter's eyes moved to the tablet in Emily's hands. A small chest image remained open. Near the lower border of the heart was a faint gray mark. Walter leaned closer. Emily instinctively angled the screen toward him. His face went still. "That was never removed." Ethan took the tablet. "That is imaging artifact." "No," Walter touched the sealed envelope. "That is metal." "From what?" Walter looked toward the elevator doors. "A place your record says Robert never entered." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Mr. Mercer, this is a controlled procedure based on real-time imaging. We cannot alter a surgical plan because someone remembers an injury from decades ago." Walter held his gaze. "I am not asking you to trust a memory." He pushed the envelope forward. "I am asking you to open the evidence." Emily looked at Ethan. He checked the time. "We are already behind schedule." Walter's voice remained calm. "Then do not become later for the wrong reason." The elevator opened. Ethan handed the tablet back to Emily. "Sergeant Price, escort Mr. Mercer to the public waiting area." Walter did not resist. As Ethan walked away, he called after him. "Doctor, if the rhythm changes near the scar, look behind it." Ethan did not turn. Emily did. Walter stood beneath the lobby lights with one hand resting on the sealed envelope. He did not look angry. He looked like a man watching a warning move beyond his reach. On the 4th floor, General Robert Hale waited in a private preparation room. At 72, he still carried the posture of command. Silver hair, steady eyes, one hand resting over the blanket near the old scar. When Ethan entered, Hale looked past him. "Did Mercer arrive?" Ethan paused. An older gentleman came to the lobby. You sent him away. He was attempting to delay the procedure based on an unverified claim. Hale's expression changed. Walter Mercer does not interfere. Ethan checked the intravenous line. He says there is retained metal near your heart. There is no such finding in the current chart. For several seconds, Hale stared at the ceiling. There are things missing from that chart. Ethan stopped. What things? Hale looked toward Emily. Did he bring the envelope? Yes, sir. Then bring him upstairs. Ethan remained composed. The operating suite is entering final preparation. An uncredentialed visitor cannot enter the controlled area. I did not ask you to bring him into the operating room. Hale's voice weakened slightly, but not the authority inside it. I asked you to hear him. Ethan looked toward the tablet. General, you have received medication. Delaying may increase risk. Hale turned his head. That man kept me alive for 11 hours when no hospital knew my name. Silence settled over the room. Emily felt the weight of the tablet in her hands. Ethan looked at Hale. Where? Somewhere the report was not allowed to name. The transport team arrived. Before Hale was moved, he caught Emily's wrist. Get the envelope. Emily nodded. She found Walter seated beneath a wall of framed photographs honoring former commanders of the medical center. His jacket lay folded over one knee. The envelope rested across both hands. He looked less like a man waiting for news than a sentry holding a position. Emily stopped before him. General Hale confirmed you saved his life. Walter lifted his eyes. A long time ago. He asked me to bring you upstairs. Walter looked toward the cardiac wing. Then we have already lost time. Emily sat beside him. What is inside? Walter ran one thumb across the old seal. Robert told me to bring it if anyone ever worked near that scar again. Then open it. He studied her face. Not her rank. Not her badge. Her willingness to listen. Walter broke the seal. Inside was a yellowed chest x-ray. A folded map, stained dark at one corner. 2 handwritten medical pages. And a smaller sealed letter. Emily carried the film to a light panel. The younger outline of Robert Hale's chest appeared. Near the lower left border of the heart, a thin metal sliver rested behind the scar. Emily looked from the film to the tablet. Why does the current skin barely show it? It is thin, Walter said. Turn it parallel to the imaging angle and it disappears. She unfolded the notes. Patient stable. Foreign object retained. Removal judged more dangerous than observation. Below the line was a signature. Walter J. Mercer. Specialist 5. Medical Corps. Emily looked at him. You wrote this. I was the medic who stayed with him. The map carried only coordinates. No unit. No mission name. One corner had been blackened by moisture. There is no evacuation record, Emily said. There could not be. Walter's voice stayed controlled. The team was operating across a border nobody was prepared to acknowledge. Robert was listed somewhere else before we reached the surgical unit. Emily looked back at the x-ray. The metal has been there more than 50 years. It has been quiet more than 50 years. Walter stood carefully. That is not the same thing. The corridor disappeared around him. White light became storm gray sky. Disinfectant became rain, fuel, mud, and wet canvas. Walter was 24 again, kneeling beside Lieutenant Robert Hale inside a temporary aid station. Rain struck the roof hard enough to bury ordinary speech. Hale was conscious. Barely. His uniform had been cut open across the chest. A narrow piece of metal rested too close to the heart for an easy decision. The field surgeon studied the film. If we remove it here, we may lose him. Walter kept 2 fingers against Hale's wrist. And if we leave it, he may survive long enough for evacuation. There was no helicopter yet. The next possible aircraft was more than 10 hours away. Hale heard the estimate. 10 hours is a long time. Document. Walter tightened the blanket over him. Then we make it 10 hours. Machines were scarce. Attention was not. Walter learned every change in Hale's breathing. The tightening around his eyes. The cooling of his skin. The slight irregularity when his body shifted against the embedded fragment. Hours passed. The radio failed twice. Near dawn, Hale's breathing lost its pattern. Not faster. Not louder. Only wrong. Walter recognized it before anyone else. He adjusted Hale's position by inches. Called the surgeon. Held his voice steady until the rhythm returned. When the helicopter finally arrived, Walter climbed aboard and refused to leave Hale's side. At the surgical unit, a senior doctor decided the object would remain. Removal carried greater risk than observation. Before Hale was taken away, he caught Walter by the sleeve. You remember where it is? Walter looked at the film. I will. Because I may not. Walter marked the map, wrote every detail by hand, then carried the record through decades of silence. The memory released him. Emily touched his arm. You stayed 11 hours. Walter looked toward operating room 4. I stayed until someone else understood what could not be removed. Emily held the old X-ray in one hand and the modern tablet in the other. And now they are mapping electrical activity near the scar. Walter's face hardened. Then show him what the chart forgot. At the restricted doors, Emily pressed her badge to the reader. A red light flashed. Sterile lockdown. She used the intercom. Operating room 4. This is Captain Brooks. I have original evidence of retained metal behind General Hale's lower cardiac scar. Inside, Ethan stood beneath the surgical lights. The general had been sedated. Final mapping had begun. A nurse relayed the message. Ethan turned toward the glass. Emily held the X-ray against the light. The film is signed by Specialist 5 Walter Mercer and corroborated by field notes. Ethan looked at Walter. Bring the image into the digital system. That answer surprised Emily. Not dismissal. Verification. She handed the film to an imaging technician through the transfer port. The old X-ray appeared beside the modern model. At one angle, the sliver was obvious. At another, it vanished. A technician leaned toward the monitor. Ethan rotated the model. The gray shadow returned near the posterior edge of the scar. His expression tightened. Why was this not in the current chart? Emily had already called Colonel Margaret Sutton. She is checking the restricted archive. Walter stepped closer to the glass. I am not the surgeon. Ethan looked at him. I am the man who knows what the surgeon was never told. Ethan studied the two images. Final therapeutic ablation is on hold. The room changed. His pride had not vanished, but professional caution had overtaken it. We will complete low-energy mapping only. Walter watched the monitor. The old scar pulls inward during contraction. Ethan nodded toward the technician. Compare motion through the full cycle. The model rotated. The scar shifted. The metallic shadow changed relative position. Not by much. Enough. Emily's phone rang. Colonel Sutton. I found the sealed report, Sutton said. Hale recovered. Foreign object retained. Medic Mercer refused evacuation until patient stabilized. Emily watched Walter. He gave no reaction. There is an attached instruction, Sutton continued. Any future electrical procedure near the chest requires manual review of original films. That instruction never entered the current chart. The archive was not merged when the medical systems changed. Inside the operating room, a low-energy mapping stimulus began. The monitor tone changed. Walter's head tilted. Hale's rhythm rose, stumbled, then shifted into a pattern outside the expected target zone. Walter's face went still. That is it. Emily looked toward him. What? The pattern from the aid station. Inside, Ethan saw the change. Stop mapping stimulus. The technician released the control. The rhythm did not settle. An alarm sounded. Then another. The main display identified activity near the mapped target. Walter looked at the old X-ray. No, Ethan turned toward the glass. Walter pointed behind the lower scar. You are treating where the signal appeared, not where the wound began. The heart rhythm deteriorated. The room moved. Ethan issued emergency instructions. Medication prepared. Imaging widened. Walter did not give treatment orders. He watched the position of the scar and the old fragment. 2 inches left, he said through the intercom. Posterior angle. Ethan hesitated only long enough to evaluate the request. Then, shift imaging field left. Posterior view. The model rotated. At first, only scar tissue. Then a narrow bright line appeared. Behind it was a small region of abnormal motion the original map had placed on the opposite side. Ethan's focus sharpened. The scar distorted the apparent origin. Walter kept his eyes on the screen. The body healed around what remained. Ethan redirected the team. The new image changed the plan. The abnormal pathway was isolated from the metallic fragment. The room moved with disciplined speed. No argument. No pride. Only work. Walter watched Hale's rhythm. The uneven pattern slowed. 1 beat. Then another. A steady tone returned. The alarms quieted one by one. No one cheered. Ethan stood beneath the lights, staring at the corrected image. The modern model. The old scar. The fragment. The history that had been absent. He looked toward Walter through the glass. Then gave one small nod. Not an apology. Not yet. Recognition. General Robert Hale opened his eyes shortly after sunrise. Pale gold light entered the recovery room through narrow blinds. His heartbeat moved across the monitor in a steady green rhythm. Walter stood near the window with his field jacket folded over one arm. He had been there almost an hour without speaking. When Hale turned his head, recognition came before strength. You brought the envelope. Walter placed it on the bedside table. You told me not to forget. A tired smile touched Hale's face. You never did. Outside the room, Ethan waited with Emily and Colonel Sutton. The surgeon had removed his cap and mask. Without them, he looked younger. Not less capable. Only less protected by certainty. Sutton opened the door. He is awake. Ethan entered. He stopped several feet from the bed. General Hale, your rhythm is stable. We changed the treatment plan after identifying distortion around the old scar. Hale studied him. Because you listened to Mercer. Ethan did not defend himself. Because I listened later than I should have. Walter opened the envelope. Behind the old X-ray was the smaller sealed letter. He handed it to Ethan. The handwriting belonged to Hale. The date was 3 days earlier. Ethan unfolded the page. If complications arise near the old scar, Walter Mercer is to be heard before any final decision is made. He paused. He brought me home when every official record placed me somewhere else. He knows what was left inside me. Ethan lowered the page. Morning light passed through the old X-ray beside him. The sliver of metal remained visible. Small. Quiet. Never gone. I trusted the system because it was precise, Ethan said. Walter looked toward the monitor. The system was not the problem. Ethan met his eyes. Then what was? The history it was given. The answer carried no anger. That made it heavier. Ethan stepped closer. Mr. Mercer, I dismissed your warning before I examined your evidence. Walter waited. I treated information outside the current chart as interference. His voice tightened. I nearly allowed confidence to become carelessness. Walter studied him. Then do not remember that I was right. Ethan looked surprised. Remember why the chart was incomplete. Hale shifted beneath the blanket. There will be another patient whose history does not fit the screen, Doctor. Ethan nodded. Yes, sir. Colonel Sutton held up the field notes. These records will be entered into the permanent chart with the original archive restriction properly referenced. Walter looked at Hale. That is where they belonged. Hale raised one unsteady hand. An old soldier's salute. Walter returned it with quiet precision. Then Ethan brought his heels together. He raised his hand as well. No order was given. None was needed. Emily stood straighter. Sutton followed. In the hallway, nurses, technicians, and officers stopped as the gesture passed from the general to the surgeon, to the forgotten combat medic who had carried one missing piece of medical history for more than half a century. Walter lowered his hand. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Soft. Measured. Alive. Machines can read what is present. But only history can explain how it got there.